there was a connection problem. The person who has the code for the connection happens to be in Zambia. And we haven't been able to contact him, so please bear with us. But my name is Richard Green. I'm an elder here at First Presbyterian Church of Brooklyn, and I warmly welcome all of you here. It's really wonderful to see so many folks here, particularly for the reason that we are all here. I would issue a special welcome to our friends at the Unitarian Church, First Unitarian Society. I'm still having dreams about those desserts that you provided with the program of a few weeks ago. It was really a wonderful experience. Plus 5 pounds. I actually want to take some home. Okay, so what is happening tonight is part of a comprehensive program here based at our church called Becoming Peacemakers. And it's an initiative that we are committed to, given all of the disarray that's happening, that people have been hearing about this evening. Our church is really trying to educate, focus, and better understand, and possibly even come up with things that we can do to lean towards a solution to what's happening. So the theme this evening is freeing Palestine, resisting anti-Semitism, and we have an extraordinary person we are extremely lucky to have, Esther Farmer. Esther has been fighting the fight for a number of decades, and she is someone we have great respect for. She is an American. She's actually one of the leaders of JVP, which is Jewish Voice for Peace, which is an American anti-Zionist advocacy organization. And in addition to that, she's an activist and advocate for a free Palestinian state. She's a playwright, she's a storyteller, and she is an inspiration. So you did not come here to hear me, you came here to hear Esther, please.
So sometimes the best way to learn history is with stories. History itself is a story, and what that story looks like very much depends on who's doing the telling. Stories are wonderful because they're not polemics. You can't argue with a story because it's a person's experience. So relative to your work of peacemaking, I think that stories are an important tool. I try to talk in a storytelling voice as much as possible, because I think that it touches people's hearts as well as their minds. So my father was born in Palestine. He identified as a Palestinian Jew. And despite what the dominant Israeli narrative has said over the years, Palestine was a country. And when my family lived there in the early 20th century, and for most of its history, Palestine was a diverse country. At the time that my family was there, it was about 80% Muslim, 10% Christian, and 10% Jewish. And people, for the most part, got along rather well. In fact, my grandmother used to always say she was a very Orthodox Jew, and she said Jews and Muslims got along fine in Palestine. We were friends, neighbors, we celebrated each other's holidays until the British got involved. Now, what she was referring to was the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration declared, in the time-honored way of colonialists, that the land of Palestine should become a Jewish dominant state. This was about 1917. And in a typical example of this kind of colonialism, the people who lived in Palestine were not consulted. The British did not do this because they loved Jews. In fact, Balfour was a known anti-Semite. The British wanted to get rid of their Jews. And Zionism was a convenient thing to solve their Jewish problem. That's what they called it, their Jewish problem. To support this narrative, they said that Palestine was a land without a people, for a people without a land. It was not a Jew who said this. It was a Christian Zionist. Of course, the problem with this story is that it wasn't true. There were people there. Hence the title of our book called A Land with a People. So, at this point in history, it's important to note that most Jews were not Zionists. They were not interested in going to Palestine. They mostly wanted to escape from European antisemitism, and I'll repeat, European antisemitism, not Palestinian antisemitism, which was very little, by coming to the United States, but the United States didn't want them. So my family, when they came here, they lived on the Lower East Side. It was an interesting story. My grandfather was a draft dodger from World War I. He didn't want to serve in the Turkish army, so he was a progressive, and he left because the penalty for not serving in the Turkish army was death by hanging. So that's how they got to New York. And they lived on the Lower East Side. They were very poor, they were very Jewish, and they were very anti-Zionist. So my family's existence exposes the lie that Judaism and Zionism is the same. And honestly, it makes no sense, because Judaism is 5,000 years old, and Israel is 75 years old. So it was created, Israel was created by an international body of people who didn't live there, and they governed without the consent of the people who did live there. So when Israel was created in 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were expelled. Since that time, this Nakba, which is what the Arabs call it, or catastrophe, has been ongoing. Palestinians on the West Bank in the occupied territories, they're not citizens, they can't vote, they can't travel freely, they can't even travel on the same roads. They are evicted, their land stolen, and they've been betrayed by the so-called peace processes that came before, most notably Oslo, which some people here might remember. It was supposed to create a Palestinian state, but has instead allowed the Israeli settlements to simply steal the land. I don't know if you guys have seen that famous, you can take a look at it, I do need that, but the famous map of Israel. And that map just kind of tells what things looked like then and where things are right now. So the Palestinians are like in this tiny little Bantustan places. They don't have the land anymore, which is why I talk about the two-state solution is really odd, because Israel has destroyed the two-state solution with the settlements. So why is this important? It's important because these are the roots of October 7th. People like to say that there was peace before October 7th. There was not peace. There was oppression. And that's extremely important. And it's important to remember also that after the Holocaust, Jews were a devastated people, and many folks believed that Israel was sort of a reparation for that historical trauma. But the Palestinians were made to pay for trauma that they did not create. And before the Holocaust, most Jews were not Zionists. And our book actually reclaims the history of Jewish anti-Zionism, which was very extensive. So what was the objection to Zionism by Jews at that time? Sometimes I think about what my father, all the things my father said to me, and it's amazing just how smart and prescient they were during that time. So much of what they said has come to pass. So what did they say? My father said that the Palestinians were made to pay for the Holocaust when they had nothing to do with it. He said, how can Jews be safe when they're kicking people out of their houses? There will always be perpetual war as long as Palestinians are oppressed. My father told us the story of how there was a boatload of Jewish refugees that were escaping Germany, and they were refused entry to the US They were sent back to die in the camps. And the Zionists said it was okay as long as the U.S. supported the state of Israel. So my father said at the time that the Zionists love Israel and hate Jews, which is the name of my story in this book. We can really see this today when the most rabid, MAGA, Christian nationalist, anti-Semitic extremists are pro-Zionist, pro-war, and pro-Israel. So all of this history is the all-important context for what is happening in our universities, a context that the major media refuses to show. I am so incredibly proud of these students and so heartened by their moral clarity. I was very active against the war in Vietnam, and I was at every demonstration. And I remember well how we were attacked then. It's really deja vu for those of us during that time. The major media has gone to great lengths to portray peaceful anti-war demonstrators as violent anti-Semitic mobs. It's so ironic, since half of the protesters are Jewish. And the only violence there is being perpetrated by the police and Zionist provocateurs. I don't know if you saw recently what happened at Northeastern University. Yeah, there was an Israeli guy with a flag, and he was screaming, "Kill the Jews," ostensibly to, make the protesters look like they were saying that, which they weren't. He was saying that, and the university and the police responded by arresting 100 Palestinian students, and he was not arrested. So I was raised to be proud of the Jewish tradition of fighting for justice for everyone. And as my mother said, what it means to be Jewish is to be for justice, not just us. That's been the motto of JUP for a while. We're Jews for justice, not just us. Jewish tradition teaches that Jews have the responsibility to repair the world, tikkun olam, to leave the world in better shape. Zionism says the opposite. It is small, it is tribal. It asks us to reject this Jewish tradition and instead embrace a philosophy that says only Jews matter, even as that philosophy destroys what it means to be Jewish. So not only is anti-Zionism not anti-Semitic, but for me, Zionism is profoundly anti-Semitic. One of the ways that this plays out is in the McCarthyite environment that exists around this issue. Palestinians and anti-Zionist Jews have been silenced for 75 years. There is a profoundly anti-Semitic assumption that all Jews love Israel. Now, there's this old joke that Jews know, you put 3 Jews in a room and you get 10 opinions. So how is it possible that they all feel the same way? And any kind of comment about, or being monolithic. No community is monolithic. You say generalizations like all black people, all Chinese people, it's inherently racist. And in this case, only one opinion has been allowed in the dominant narrative. So at the same time, I think it must be said that for me, one of the most painful things has been the influence of Zionism on the Jewish community. To be sure, there were many strains of Zionism, including labor and socialist Zionism, but they did not win the day. The Zionist strain that is prevalent today comes from the original strain of Zionism's founder, Jabotinsky. He was explicitly fascist. I don't use that word lightly. It openly states, and he openly stated, that only Jewish children matter and everyone else is expendable. These are the people running Israel now. The absolute horror of death and destruction in Gaza and the West Bank is excused as necessary for Jewish safety because of October 7th. But for me, this is an example of how Israel has not made Jews safe, because the inherent contradiction of the oppression of Palestinians has not been reckoned with. And we know, as Jews and as people of good conscience everywhere, where there is oppression, there is resistance. I'm a Jew. Safety is really important to me. I'm very concerned about Jewish safety. And for hundreds of years, anti-Semitism has not come from Palestine. It has come from Western European white supremacy. And now that includes Christian nationalism, which once again, and Christian Zionism, which once again, on the one hand, loves Israel, and on the other hand, screams, Jews will not replace us. So I'm very frightened by that. I'm really frightened by that. So it seems that the issue of Jewish safety on campuses only refers to the Jews that support Israel. If you are a Jew that does not support Israel, your safety apparently doesn't count. Well, we are also Jews. So for me, Zionism is like Trumpism. Who's the biggest bully on the block? This, in the end, is the essence of colonialism. But the good news is that there is now a real reckoning. It's a real reckoning with how we got here. And with what Zionism is, particularly among young Jews, but not only young Jews, it's all over. It's in our universities, it's in our Jewish elders group, and if any of you came to our Seder in the streets 2 weeks ago, Naomi Klein laid it out really well when she said there's an exodus, the exodus of Jews from Zionism. That is the light at the end of the tunnel. So in my work in JVP, I'm particularly proud of our relationships with our Palestinian partners. And that's one of the silver linings in this horror of destruction, that this reckoning with Zionism and the action supporting a ceasefire and an end to the killing is a healing activity. The way to healing between Jews and Palestinians is by supporting justice. And that's why being an anti-Zionist is so important. You know, I have to say, I'm often in Palestinian spaces, and I'm always surprised at how I do not experience anti-Semitism at all. And part of why I'm surprised is because there is no doubt that what Israel is doing is fueling anti-Semitism. It's not just that Israel is now a pariah state in the world, which it is. It's also because in conflating Israel with Jews, in destroying Gaza in the name of Jews, Jews are being blamed. So what we're doing in JVP, in Jewish Voice for Peace, for me is the antidote. You know, my partner on the train recently had this interesting experience. There were a couple of Orthodox Jews that came on the subway, and somebody next to him said, "These damn Jews, look how they're killing people in Gaza." And the other person said, "You can't really say that. Look what they did in Grand Central Station." So I'm really proud of that. Here's where the healing starts. So relative to healing, I wanted to mention that we created a new program in JVP called How to Have Hard Conversations About Israel-Palestine. And I always start off these workshops saying that it's not easy changing your worldview. It takes courage. So many of our members come from very Zionist backgrounds, and people are on a journey. You yourselves have come through this journey. So people are in many different places on that journey. And in the Hard Conversation workshop, we want to create compassionate spaces to question our assumptions. I'm hoping that my story can aid that process here. And I thank you all for the courage to challenge the dominant assumptions and to open yourselves to having this conversation. So let's have a conversation. I very much prefer conversation to me speaking, and I know there's a lot of fear around this because, you know, fear has been weaponized to the point where people are scared to open their mouths for fear of being called an anti-Semite. Let's dump that. I believe that everybody here is here in good faith, and you're curious and want to know more. So why don't we start with tell me what you're struggling with at this moment around this issue. What's your struggle? Yeah.
I was just going to say, well, what is the solution? I guess is my struggle. It's so complicated.
You know, obviously a question that everybody asks. We live here, I don't feel like we have a say about what the solution is. But I will say this, equal rights would be good. One state, two state, I don't know. But equal rights, that seems important. And I don't know if people have followed the BDS campaign. The BDS is boycott, sanctions, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which is what the students are talking about. It is eminently reasonable. What is BDS asking for? It is saying that Palestinians who were refugees should have the right to come back. If every Jewish person in the world, whether they have any tie to Israel or not, can come back, the Palestinians should be able to come back. Equal rights and an end to the occupation. That's what they're asking for. And BDS has been so demonized by the press. And it's a non-violent boycott movement, same as it was in South Africa. And it was patterned after that. So that's one of the things that I think people are now, more and more people are signing on to BDS, and I think it's extremely important. Yes?
The question of fear, and I fear within our congregation, is not to speak about it. For fear of what? And I'm thinking of, in the First Unitarian congregation, I can't think of any time in the past 60 years where social issues have not been spoken about, whatever they are. But there is that now. So how do we confront fear?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky question. I think that Israel has had an incredible propaganda machine. They even have a name for it, hospital. You know, it's like this the machine of, first of all, conflating Judaism with Israel. And, I have to say, I grew up very Jewish, but in my family, my father would say, Israel, Shmizrael. It was not a happy word to say Israel in my very Jewish household. Fear is a way that the powers that be can really manipulate people, and they have. So on the one hand, there has been obviously deep generational trauma after the Holocaust. And so there's this thing, particularly among older Jews who came through the Holocaust, including wonderful people that I admire a lot, like Bernie Sanders, for example, who really struggles with this and has also come out on the right side of history. But I think that fear is something that we have to acknowledge. And in the Hard Conversations workshop, I had many people who say they were Holocaust survivors. And sometimes when somebody says they're a Holocaust survivor, that ends the conversation because people were so scared to say anything to a Holocaust survivor. But for me, that's something you can build with. Because if you're a Holocaust survivor and you are in my book talk, talking about Zionism, that means that you know that never again is for everybody, not just you. So I think that dealing with values, what our values are as a Jewish people, is an important way of taking on the fear, but also acknowledging that there was historical trauma, and that's real. And it's also real for Palestinians.
Thank you.
Yes?
I think a lot of work needs to be done to make people aware of the oppression that has been going on in Palestine. Like, I actually, I think a lot of people were drawn to get active because they saw the mass, tens of thousands of innocent people being killed. But then I started to read and learn about things like the land theft and people being just taken without charge and imprisoned for months on end and tortured. Like, I don't think most Americans know about this. Probably, I wonder how many Israelis really know because of all the propaganda. And I think we really need to do the hard work of educating everybody about these things, which could change the conversation.
Yeah. And it is changing. changing the conversation. Because despite the fact that the propaganda machine has been so powerful for so long, the other side is getting through. I mean, I think you yourselves know, I was first invited here, and then I was kind of disinvited, and now I'm invited again. And this is not the first time that's happened to me. It's happened at the French school, it's happened at various places. And that's because of a particular kind of Zionist presence that has made it impossible for people to hear the other side, and that's breaking down. And I think that's that's the silver lining here. And it's not just democracy now. Even the mainstream media, things come through. And it's still very difficult. I mean, I can't tell you, we have generated, JVP I think has generated, I'm trying to remember the exact figure, but I think it's something like 500,000 letters to the New York Times. If they printed 20, it's a lot.
And I want to say one other thing, which is that I am not obviously Jewish, but I'm Jewish. And when I graduated from college in the 1990s, my grandfather, by the way, also Lower East Side, he was born in like 1906. And he actually volunteered to serve in World War II because he was too old at the time. But he was so upset about what was happening and felt like he needed to do something. So he went and he became a big Zionist. And I remember in the early 90s, like trying to bring up this issue with him, and it was going to create the end of the relationship. Like that's how, because he had a narrative. And he couldn't hear anything but that narrative, And I'll just say one other thing, which is that, so my mom is 80, and in January, I told her I went to the march in Washington, D.C., and she said your grandfather would be rolling in his grave right now, and she hasn't talked to me since.
This comes up a lot. A lot of young Jews in JDP are really struggling with their families. So there's like families break up, and a lot of the hard conversation work is geared to that, how to talk to your family and how to work to build on what people are questioning, because people are questioning right now. I know Israelis and their families, they're not completely there, they're on a journey, but they're like, what's happening is not my Judaism. And so we want to build on that. But what you're raising is just, it's all over. And the good news is that we're having these conversations.
Yeah.
Yes?
I guess the thing that keeps things on my mind that probably isn't really related to Israel so much, so it may not be germane here, I don't know. It has to do with the narrative that, Hamas doesn't actually represent the sentiments of Palestinian people. They're hurting Palestinian people by hiding in civilian places and exposing civilians to retaliation by the Israeli Defense Forces. Trying to attack Hamas, they end up destroying, tens of thousands of people who aren't militants. And I'm just wondering to what degree Hamas actually is supported by what percentage of folks in Palestine, and to what degree Hamas represents a much smaller piece of mind share within Palestine, and that there's a vast majority of Palestinian people that wish that Hamas would stop what it's doing and let things get more peaceful. It's a question in my mind. I don't know if anyone has an answer to it.
Well, a couple of things about that which I think are important. Hamas is a political party. I don't know how much support the Democrats or the Republicans have here either, to tell you the truth. So I can't speak to Hamas. Hamas would not exist if there was no occupation. That is the most important thing. And that's something that goes on with narratives and language all over the place. Like the conversation around the student protesters, and not the content of what they're talking about. So it's the same thing. The Israelis, they insist that we have to be talking about Hamas, but there would be no Hamas if you weren't doing what you were doing in Israel. That's the first thing. The second thing is that Israel has actually propped Hamas up. It gave them money. Netanyahu wanted Hamas because he wanted it as a hedge against Al-Fatah, which is the other political organization. So these are important questions, but I think that narrative around, well, what about the fact that Hamas is doing so-and-so? Well, they wouldn't be doing so-and-so if you weren't doing what you were doing to the Palestinian people. It all goes back to that. And that's why it kind of drives me a little crazy when people say, well, there was a ceasefire before October 7th. There were actually 4 wars in Gaza before October 7th. 4. So there was no ceasefire. It's been constant Nakba or catastrophe in Gaza. So I hope that answers your question a little bit, because I know that this comes up a lot. And for me, a lot of the talk about Hamas is kind of a red herring. It's like a way of not looking at what's actually happening. You don't kill 40,000 people to get one Hamas fighter. It's against international law. It's just wrong. And I think people in the world are seeing that right now. And I'm not an apologist for Hamas either. I'm not saying that either. Yes?
And also, the people of Gaza haven't had the right to vote for 20 years or so. I think the last vote that they voted for. So most of the people of Gaza never voted for Hamas or had them represent them, wanted them. So
Yeah, well, most of the people here didn't vote for Trump either. We got Trump.
right.
Yeah.
My question.
But they were also, I mean, just the context of that was, Hamas was actually, at the time that they were voted in, they were administering the country, I mean, the strip, Gaza, as much as possible, but still Israel controlled the whole thing. Gaza is an open-air prison. People can't leave, they can't come back, it's just an open-air prison. Nobody was administering it except Hamas.
Right, and the brutality, even before October 7th, when Palestinians would cross where they had checkpoints.
Right.
Every place, if you go a little bit, you have to go into
Absolutely.
into Israel to go to work, and the checkpoints were just brutal to people.
And they still are, by the way, in the West Bank. You know, all of this, there's this sort of not so silent war in Gaza, but there's a silent war going on in the West Bank. I mean, they have been razing villages, like literally just setting fire to people's homes and villages in the West Bank for the longest time, way before October 7th. And nobody was saying a word. I mean, that's the other thing that's really important about this. You know, it's our tax dollars that are paying for this. That's the horror here, it's our tax dollars. Yes, I have a question here and then Rich.
Oh, I have already forgotten what I was going to say, so
Oh.
I'll try to think of it again.
I was going to say, I think a societal shortcoming in this country is the almost neutral position that organized religion is taking with respect to what's going on right now. And so I was going to ask you if you would comment on that. I mean, I think probably the civil rights movement was the last time I saw ministers, rabbis, people of the cloth marching in formation and really advocating on behalf or against a particular area. It doesn't seem to be happening anymore. What do you think's going on?
Well, my feeling about that is it's such a, kind of a personal story to answer that question. I've always been so ashamed of what Zionists have done that I stayed away from Jewish spaces. I mean, I've been an activist my whole life, and I did not want to deal with Jewish spaces at all, given what Zionism has done. And I'll tell you, in 1970, I was at Brooklyn College, And in that time, I was at City College first, then at Brooklyn College, and we were having major battles about open admissions and integrating the school, because Brooklyn College at the time was 95% Jewish. And they did not, the Zionists fought, I cannot tell you, it was just a complete fight with the Zionist leadership of the school around open admissions, even to the point where they did not want the first Africana and Puerto Rican Studies department in the country happened at CUNY during those years, and we did win open admissions. There was no Judaic Studies department until then. At that point, we created a Judaic Studies department, and the Zionists were still opposed. So the reason I'm saying this is because, interestingly enough, I came back to Jewish spaces in my social justice work because of JVP, an explicitly anti-Zionist organization. So I think that Zionism has moved, and I'm really glad you're raising this issue, because Zionism has moved a large part of the Jewish community to the right. And that's been a very painful thing in my life to see that, because that was, as you say, that was not the case. I will say that the United States has not been neutral. The United States has been absolutely funding and complicit. They could have stopped this, or foreign policy could have stopped this years ago. $3.8 billion of our money every year is going for these 5,000-pound bombs to bomb the people in Gaza. That's the horror.
But there were, today is a little late, but it happened today that there was
The first shipment was
the
stopped.
first shipment was stopped of those big bombs and guns.
Absolutely. And we can thank the students, and we can
That's
thank people who have been fighting this. They deserve a lot of credit. We all deserve a lot of credit, because we've been putting in a lot of hours to make this happen. Yeah.
Well, I remember what I was going to say, and it was about, it was about this question of the popularity of Hamas in Gaza. And I was thinking about it, and I'm just trying to imagine, well, I guess I think that any time a people are oppressed in the way that the Palestinians in Gaza have been oppressed by the state apparatus of Israel, that I find that I can't imagine where else they can turn. You know, like, I just think, like, I listened to Ezra Klein's podcast, and I think at one point he did have someone on there who said that as much as they've been able to poll, there has been a rise in popularity of Hamas in Gaza. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, how could there not be? Like, these are people who have been imprisoned for no reason. Talk about, I mean, the atrocities that have been talked about by the popular, like by, say, the New York Times. I don't want to say get into anything about what happened, has happened on October 7th. Those kinds of atrocities have been happening to the Palestinians for decades. And I'm not saying it excuses it. I just want to say that, like, the centering of one narrative, absolutely over this, paying any attention or centering the other narrative, I think that kind of, like, helplessness and frustration and the oppression that people have been experiencing, like, I can't feel like it's my place to judge them if they do like Hamas. I mean, I kind of feel like weird saying that, but at the same time, like, I'm so privileged living here. We all are. Like, we can't even imagine. Although I can kind of imagine, because I have been to the West Bank. So I've seen some of this with my own eyes. And I've been to the Jordan River on the Jordanian side, and I've had the Israeli tanks, guns aimed at me because I was on the Jordanian side. And I was with my Jordanian Arab son-in-law, who had never in his life been to the Jesus baptism site on the Jordan River until he went with his white mother-in-law minister from the US, because I was somewhat of cover for him, because if he had ever gone there without me, he thought, growing up, that he could just be killed by Israel because he's a young Arab man. And they could could just kill with impunity. That's what he was raised believing about going anywhere near the Israeli border because of actual events that led him to believe that. So I just think that we can't, like, I cannot judge. I don't want an organization like Hamas to be the one that is speaking for the Palestinian people, absolutely, and I think many of them do not either, and they have no other choice right now,
Yeah.
and haven't for a long time.
I mean, no, I think it's a really important point, because I have felt this way for years, like, when people would demonize the boycott, the BDS thing, like, what do you want the Palestinians to do? What should they do? This has been going on for like 75 years. What should they do? So Hamas gave their answer. And I'm not saying it's a good answer, but that was their answer to what should they do? You're demonizing every non-violent thing that the Palestinians have tried. And that's why I think it's important to support the efforts that are non-violent, that are, and BDS is one of them, one of the important tactics. Yes.
To follow on that, I think I would also agree and emphasize that we not play into the lie that this is a war. Because Israel has an army. Palestine doesn't have an army. They have an amalgamation of militant groups. One side has planes, war planes, the other side does not. One side has, like you said, those however many ton bombs, the other side does not. One side has nuclear weapons, the other side does not. So the media playing this off as like a war is a marketing tactic that I don't think reflects on the reality of the situation. So for us to talk about it as if both sides are equal is, I think, very deceptive to all of us. And also, just to follow that, who else is coming to their aid? The UN is doing nothing. The International Criminal Court has done nothing. The International Court of Justice has done nothing. No other Middle Eastern countries have done anything. They are defenseless. I'm just going to say, like, if I was there, out of desperation, I'd be like, what stands between my obliteration and me being alive? Maybe I hate Hamas, maybe I don't agree with them, but, like, what else is there for me to not obliterate me? Because clearly the enemy has come to obliterate. What am I supposed to do? And I don't think that's anything anyone is admitting or talking about. Put yourself in that situation, what would you do? And I think, regarding the whole argument that some people have about using human shields or collateral damage, I heard a great analogy that really opened my eyes, which is that if we had an active school shooting in our neighborhood, in our school, would we demolish and bomb the whole school with the students, the teachers, the lunch ladies, everyone inside to kill the one guy? And if it's not okay for us to do that in our neighborhood, why is it okay for us to do that to other people?
Well, I think we have to create environments like this where people can say these unacceptable things because people are afraid to share this. And I think it's important that we do this. So I very much appreciate this conversation. Yes?
Okay, well, I may be saying something that's unacceptable in this environment that's been created. But, and getting back to some words that we used about censoring something small.
Or can you speak a little louder?
Yeah, I think that a reason people see what's going on as an opportunity to increase anti-Semitism, whether the conversation is anti-Semitic, is that the focus on that particular thing that's going on in the world, a world that's roiled with civil war and occupation. In fact, we all are sitting on occupied land. We know that. And so what really concerns me is that it almost feels incredibly convenient for young people who are spirited and idealistic and less experienced in life than someone like me who's 66 and you who I think we share an alma mater and pay for college. But I feel as though it's so much easier to point the finger at those occupiers Because, and I agree with you, I think Israel's been brutal. I took this wonderful course that was, you might have heard this professor from Stanford Emeritus at Reconstruction and Synagogue in Wisconsin, of all places, did this like film series earlier in the year. I mean, it was so eye-opening with brutality. In fact, there was this 2-hour film on Gaza that was before October 7th, and the place looked like a disaster over it. Right? You know, the pollution in the sea. It was horrible. So I'm not sympathetic to what brutality Israel's government has done to these people. But I'm really bothered by a lot of people sitting in the safety of this country at their expensive institutions, and you know which students are really going to suffer following these protests.
Well, it's already happened.
The scholarship-
CCNY is like,
I know.
the CCNY kids
I know very
got
much.
treated much more brutally.
I've worked for CUNY, all right, and I know that the kids who go to Columbia on scholarship who very much feel this issue because they have lived social injustice. They're the ones whose lives are going to be totally screwed because their parents aren't going to bail them out of jail. Their parents aren't going to get them an expensive attorney, and their parents aren't going to just throw the tuition money at a different college when they get kicked out of Columbia. So I know who's really going to hurt in all of this. The people with the money can always find a way out. But a lot of these people with the money, it's very easy for them to point and say, occupy, occupy, and we're all sitting here on occupied land. And that's why I think a lot of people find this very anti-Semitic, because it's really easy to point fingers at those Jews. That's how they see it. Those Jews in Israel are occupiers, they're brutal, and forget about the fact that we all live here in occupied land. And what concerns me in terms of the language of anti-Zionism is now you have people living in Israel as Jews who have lived there for multiple generations. And they're hearing anti-Zionism and wondering, well, what does that mean? Does that mean I get up and go? You're absolutely right, they took people's land. I'm not disputing that. But what do you do about those people? Oh, what do you do for that man about all the occupiers sitting in this space here?
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things that I do in this hard conversations thing is, you know, I come from the theater, so I do a lot of theater stuff. And one of the exercises we do in theater is called yes and. And yes and is where you acknowledge what somebody says and then you add to them. You add to what they're saying. So I'm going to yes and what you just said. I think that what you're saying about us being on occupied land is absolutely right. We are on occupied land. The issue is not so much that, it's what are we doing now? What are they doing now? I can't say, okay, are all the settlers going to be leaving in Israel? I don't know. Most Palestinians don't see that. Nora Ericott, who is, she wrote the foreword to our book, and she's a very prominent human rights and international lawyer. And she knows that if Palestinians have the right to go back, they'll have to be living with some of the settlers. You know, people know that. We're not going to be able to throw out all the settlers. Will some people have to leave? I don't know. Again, I'm not there. I can't say that. But I think what we continue to do, this is ongoing. This isn't like they just stopped doing this. This is continuing.
Yeah.
That's the issue. And that's how I would answer that question. But there is no doubt that we've done, this is what settler colonialism looks like. We did it, they're doing it, Britain did it. The issue is, how do we stop? Yes, well, let me have somebody that has spoken, then we get back to you, yeah.
I was just thinking about in terms of separating Zionism or separating Israel from Judaism. You know, I feel like with like the Jewish population in Brooklyn specifically, like there's such a connection to Israel. And like my childhood best friend grew up Catholic, but she converted to Judaism, which was like a really extensive process from what I heard. And she married into a Jewish family, and like her son, I just recently found out, is going to a Jewish day school in first grade. And one of like the tenets of their like charter is like you have to support the state of Israel. And it's just heartbreaking for me.
Heartbreaking.
Like, 'cause she's such a liberal woman. Like, she was always the kid in college. She was like, had that fiery hair and like voted for Hillary and all that stuff. And like, it's so weird, like not, like to be able to have this conversation. Like, we haven't really talked about it. Like, she's just praying for peace. Like, how do you separate, like I grew up Catholic. I I don't feel like, and I'm Protestant now, I don't feel connected to Rome or connected to like Ireland as a result of my religion, you know?
Yeah.
If Ireland is doing something terrible, I will like say, wow, that's really awful, you know? Or if like the Pope is doing something terrible, wow, that's really awful. Like, that doesn't like affect my faith, like. So how do you separate Judaism from Israel? Like, how do you disconnect that piece of land from your religion?
You know, there's a lot of controversy in the Jewish community around the difference between diasporism and this whole thing about the ethno-state. I mean, I don't support Islamic republics. I wouldn't want to see the United States be a Christian republic. So why would there be a Jewish republic? It doesn't make any sense to me. Plus, you know, there was a book written by Melanie Kantrowitz, who was the founder of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, and she talked a lot about diasporism. And again, talking about the precedence of the Jewish non-Zionist, anti-Zionist. My father used to say, do Jews really need a state? Maybe the United States needs a state to protect its oil interest in the Middle East, but do Jews need a state? So in a way, Israel, and that's being seen more and more, was a project of imperialism. And I think that's really important. The other thing that you're raising, which is this whole thing about countries, like Israel has the right to exist. That's a really funny thing to say. You know, when I grew up, there was no Bosnia, there was no Serbia, there was no Uzbekistan, right? These countries are created by colonialists. They create them. They say, okay, this is no longer Yugoslavia, now we're going to call it something else. They didn't ask the people for this. So people have a right to exist. Countries, not so much. I think we want to get that straight too. Yes.
From this discussion, I think I'm reflecting on how I am to be able to be in spaces with a lot of people who share similar values, and especially there's you folks, and then also to the churches hosted in this community. And what I'm wondering about is, I often find myself in an echo chamber of people who hold similar values, and while they might differ slightly, they might be even open to the conversation. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on where you begin with the people you might not even be meeting, and where best efforts are from this group of people who seem of good conscience, like you're saying, where we put this besides directing it all back inwards at ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the whole hard conversation piece is all about, is talking to people who don't feel the same way. We do a lot of role playing. We do a lot of practicing, different kinds of conversations with different kinds of tropes. For example, Israel has a right to defend itself, all of those kinds of things. How do you answer them? And we worked really hard at figuring that out. I was invited to, this is such a strange thing for me, but I was invited to do a talk at Chani, I don't know if anybody knows, she's the astrologer to the stars. Right, she's Oprah's astrologist. Now, I'm lost in this world. This is not my genre of people. She's been extremely supportive of JVP. She loves JVP. So I got this call from Stephanie Fox, the executive director of JVP, and said, Jenny wants you to be on her show. I'm like, okay. And it was hard conversations. So there was this young Arab Jew who did it with me. We worked on it. We did all these role plays. And this was an experience I'll never forget because it was live streamed, right? I'm an elder. What do I know from this, right? So there's all these people are writing things at the same time. And balloons are going up. And I'm thinking that I'm supposed to follow that and also follow what she said. All people, I was literally going nuts. So then all of a sudden, I got 500 followers, and I had to create an Instagram, which I didn't know how to do. And so now these young people people are helping me do this thing. And I recently got this thing that Tony Kushner knows me. How does Tony Kushner know me? This is all from social media. So this one thing is that social media is very problematic in one way and amazing in another way. And the young people, both in JDP and also in the Palestine Youth Movement, have incredibly used social media to really build this thing. So conversations are happening. They really are happening. And it's a very complex question about how you do yes and with people that are saying sometimes horrible things. And how do you look for offers and how do you build on what people are saying. So you should join one of our hard conversations.
I would love to.
Yeah.
I'll find you after.
Yeah. Yes, in the back, and then you.
Yeah, in the interest of these hard conversations, I have been talking to my.
I have what?
In the interest of these hard conversations, I've been talking ongoing conversations with my Trump-supporting Zionist mom, and I did get her to admit for about 10 to 15 minutes that there might be two sides to the story, which I'm very proud of. She's probably reverted by this point, I don't know. But what is any resource, video, book, feel free to plug your one, that you would turn to first if you're trying to talk to a loved one who, you know.
Well, I do recommend this book. It's called The Land of the People, Palestinians and Jews Confront Zionism. And the reason why I recommend it is because it's stories. They're stories of both Jews who have come through, most of whom were Zionists and came from Zionist families that began to see things in a new way. And that's very touching. And also from Palestinians who have been the direct recipients of what Zionism has done. And there's a healing aspect to that, being able to show both of those, not from the perspective of dialoguing that both are equal, because they're not. As you pointed out so eloquently, it is not equal. You've got thousands of kids who are in jail. Israel is one of the only countries in the world that, incarcerates children for throwing rocks. I mean, it's really, and there are 7,000 political prisoners. Almost 3,000 of them have not been charged, and they don't have to be charged. With administrative detention, you can lock up anybody. I have friends who get locked up for any reason at all. So, yeah, it's, yes.
Okay, I just had one comment because my skin was crawling when someone said, well, if Hamas would just stop, then everything would be all right. You know, they used to tell black people that too. And so I never want to hear that again. And I will always speak out against that. I hope they never stop, because who else is going to speak for these people? This is like, we shouldn't have a sit-in because it'll make people uncomfortable. We shouldn't have this. Who cares if you're uncomfortable? People are living and dying and you're worried about your comfort. I don't even want to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that the young people are saying very loudly. The students, no business as usual while there's a genocide going on. And I support that 100%.
And that's what it is.
If we had done that before the Holocaust, maybe there wouldn't have been a Holocaust. And that's the thing that people have to remember.
Yeah, just shut up and be quiet. So we can continue to kill you.
Yes.
Just a quick yes and to your point about pointing fingers at Israel. I just want to say that the main driver for me is the fact that my tax money is paying for it. It makes me feel so
infuriating, isn't it?
So responsible for what's happening. So I just wanted to put that on.
And I think that that's part of the fight that needs to go on. In your activity, in your peacemaking thing, I think that's a really important fight. Imagine what we could do with that money. They don't have money for this. We can't have a healthcare system there. We can't deal with student debt, but we're able to send $3.8 billion a year, plus this additional $18 billion that they just sent. And even the thing, they stopped the offensive, this latest bombs. They're still sending defensive weapons. And this offensive, defensive, they're all pretty offensive, to tell you the truth. Last couple of questions, yes. Yes, you and then Lady Madrid. Yeah, go ahead.
So my issue isn't with people who are antagonistic, it's with people who are oblivious. Because at this point, I feel like unless you don't own any computer or device, like, you have to know that things are bad. And there's people that used to be living in this bubble. And so it's like people in my life that I have no stomach to talk to hang out with, to socialize with, because they just carry on as if everything is normal and fine, and planning vacations with their families. How do you continue to, like, you know, not just like coexist with those people, but also to engage and do what you're doing?
And also have some joy in my own life. I mean, you know, I struggle with that one. I really do. You know, it's like, how am I supposed to go on vacation when this is going on? It's like, this is torturous. But, you know, there's a lot of, I learned something from some of the leftists that I met in Latin America, who feel that joy is a revolutionary act. And one of my very good Palestinian friends in the West Bank, he's a fan of joy. And that's very inspiring. So I think that this is a very schizoid moment, because it's like the horror and then the incredible upsurge of people doing all these amazing things. And 1 minute I'm so moralized, I'm so like, oh my God, you know, if the world is going to these kids, I can sleep at night, you know, it's like a beautiful thing. And then the horror of what Israel is doing. So both are existing at the same time. We have to find a way of having all of that. That's not easy.
That's a
Thank you.
wonderful question, a wonderful sentiment, I think, to end our program on. But we love you.
You can get this book, yes. You can get it on Amazon, actually. This is good news. The publisher called and said that this was their biggest selling book in December. I was like, you can buy it on Amazon, but I suggest you buy it from the publisher itself, which is Monthly Review.
Did you show the cover?
The cover.
Show the cover?
Oh, yes.
Okay. For the First Pres folks and those who are not from First Unitarian Brooklyn, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Reverend Negan Henry, and I'm the assistant minister at First UU Brooklyn, right around the corner. We share our music director is Adam Pod, and you all, your accompanist is Matt Pod, the identical twin. So we're already connected, right? And I just wanted to say that we're so pleased that some of you were able to come to the humanitarian aid and benefit concert that we hosted back at the end of March, and that we are so excited to be able to come here. So thank you for inviting us and having us, and I hope that we can continue to do some things together. That would be great. So I'll stay in touch with Reverend Connor, and we'll keep, seeing what we can do together. Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.